I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight. She didn't know she was speaking tonight until about, 6 o'clock? 5:30? And Bhante Sumana asked her if she would speak. This is Ayya Dhammadira, and Ayya is a term of respect for a teacher, and here we use Bhikkhuni, but the word Ayya is the same. Bhikkhuni is a female monk, and Ayya, what is the direct translation? It's a teacher? So either is okay. So some people will call me Ayya, but our tradition here is I'm Bhikkhuni. So Ayya is a Bhikkhuni, but she uses the title Ayya. And she lives in Colorado Springs and has her own center, and she has an incredible background. I've always wanted to spend more time finding out about. You studied in England, and you were in the monastery there for many years, in Australia, and she's traveled around the world to be with different teachers and different monasteries. And so she's going to do whatever she wants to do tonight. And Bhante Badi and I will help out if there's anything she wants us to help her with. So thank you so much. She was here for a few days, and then she extended her trip by 1 day. So that's why we hadn't planned it originally. She was leaving early this morning, and she decided to stay 1 more day. So that's why we were able to grab her. I was able to have her speak in Elkhorn with my group there last Thursday, but with the precept ceremony, there wasn't a time slot for her to speak here. So we had to grab her when we could, even without giving her any advance notice.
Well, thank you very much. It's my honor and privilege to be here with you all. I had 2 thoughts regarding how we could do this remainder of our time together. And that is, one, if any of you have questions, you could ask something that's been on your mind regarding practice, your practice of meditation, something you struggle with in your life, how to apply the Buddhist principles in your life. That's always really excellent. And I'm sure if you have a question, it will be relevant to many people in the room. So that's one thing. If there's absolutely no questions, then I can talk about something else. But first, I'd like to invite you, in case there are any thoughts or questions that come up, something maybe you've been contemplating. Yes?
There seems to be some confusion, which I picked up from the Buddhist Ayya Yogi. We refer to the eye mudra as the point between the eyebrows, the origin of the nose, not the end of the nose. That's incorrect. You become cross-eyed. Yogis are taught to put the attention of the mind in the base of our eyes and the mid-spot between the eyebrows as a break upon the mind and thoughts, worries, and cares.
Well, I haven't studied the yoga tradition, so I can't speak authoritatively on that. When the Buddha talks about putting mindful attention in front of oneself, it's often thought that it is either at the breath, at the nostrils, or below the nostrils, or could be at the chest area, noticing rising and falling there, or at the abdomen, noticing rising and falling there. So I have heard that if you do focus in a really hard, concentrated way, you can get a headache. So it's not about forcing your attention. As you say, if you focus too hard in one area and you notice you get a headache, well then try something else. Because I don't think that Buddha's intention was for us to strain and struggle with the practice. So I don't know if that addresses.
Well, we're just taught to place our attention to the mind and the base of our eyes and the mid-spot between the eyebrows. Should our attention wander from this spot, gently but firmly bring it back again and again to the mid-spot between the eyebrows, the the seat of divine perception in man.
Okay.
And even on the statue in the back, there seems to be an indication of something in its mid-forehead, like the mind's eye.
Right, right. Do you want to say something?
I think that's not Todd. That's that little. What is that?
Bindu?
It's kind of.
Hairy mole, actually. Little swirl of hair.
It's a swirl of hair, right? That's just a kind of a traditional way the Buddha is the traditional way a Buddha looks has that little tuft of hair that swirls a certain way.
Oh, in the Hindu tradition, they often use the bindu or the mark there. I think it is to signify that this is one of the chakras, one of the central channel where we can focus. Now, with the Buddha's teaching, this knowledge or awareness is what's really important, and that knowledge and awareness is not an intellectual, just knowing all the facts about something. It's a deep knowing from one's experience. And so, even though this is often referred to maybe as that eye of knowledge, did you say that?
Or the eye of the brain.
Okay.
We don't see with our eyes, we actually see with the brain.
Okay. So I don't think the Buddha was talking so much about anatomically and intellectually knowing as much as this, vijja in Pali means knowledge. Avijja means ignorance. So this is not just like ignorance. I don't know what the capital of Hungary is or something like that. It's not that kind of ignorance. It's more about the ignorance about the things that really, really matter. The ignorance about the three characteristics of existence, such as everything is impermanent and subject to change. This is one of the things you chanted today here. Another thing is the ignorance that things that we think are going to provide lasting satisfaction don't. But we get fooled, we forget. And so that's what mindfulness is about. Sati means remembering to bring our attention back to the present moment, remembering that this body-mind is a constant flow and flux, that impermanence. And also, then if we hold on tightly to any part of that experience, and we identify with it as being me, who I am, that's also another form of ignorance. We're creating a sense of self where there really isn't one. We assume that there's a constancy. And yet, if we truly investigate, then there isn't. We'll see that for ourselves. That's the kind of knowledge the Buddha said we need to cultivate. If you read about that in a book, you might go, well, I believe it or I don't believe it. And that's your prerogative. But if you actually know it for yourself, you don't have to believe. Because that kind of knowledge is beyond belief. Are there any other questions?
Do you incorporate any hatha yoga in your preparation for higher states of meditation?
Personally, I find my body gets stiff sometimes, and it's good to do some kind of hatha yoga, stretching, postures, movements. Mindfulness can be practiced in any posture. The body can be in this posture, sitting, practicing mindfulness of breathing or awareness of sensations in the body. Oh, you can also practice mindfulness while you're walking. You notice your feet touching the ground, the sensation as your heel touches the middle portion of your foot, your toes, and lifting and rising. And that can be very calming too. And it's good to do different postures. Even lying down is a posture. You may have seen a a statue of a lying down Buddha. They have a very famous one in Sri Lanka. The danger there is, of course, if we're tired at night and you do the lying down posture, you might just go into the snoozing posture, which you lose a little bit of mindfulness there usually. But so there are different postures, and with Hatha Yoga, you can practice as you move, as you feel the muscles in your body extending. I know the muscles in the body are extending. You can notice all the subtle different changes and sensations in your body, and that makes it really useful. So it's useful on two levels. The first being just good for your body to be not tight and tense, and secondly, to integrate that awareness with the movement.
Well, like in postures, actually you're trying to control the prana. You go into a pose and you're supposed to return to the your breathing naturally.
Right. Well, you're speaking from a perspective of the kind of yogic tradition, whereas and I'm not trying to invalidate that, I'm just representing the Buddhist teaching, and he didn't talk about controlling the breath so much, but noticing as it is. When it's short, I know it's short. When it's long, I know it's long. So just different traditions. Yes, in the back.
So we all have troubles in our mind or things that are really out of our control or influence that still impact us. So is this mindfulness to be well and happy regardless of, even though you interact with that trouble all the time? Is that
The end goal?
Yes.
Well, yes, actually, the way you phrased your question has the answer in it, and that is we can't control. We can't control the circumstances in our lives. You can't even control, we may try to control the breath, but there's things that are happening in our own body that we can't control. And the Buddha would say, can you make your mind think a certain thought when you want to think a certain thought? Maybe for a short time, but you probably all notice that when you're sitting in meditation, thoughts just come randomly that you didn't ask them to come. So if we look at this whole notion of control, we'll see that we're not in control even in our own body-mind until perhaps we've really cultivated the path a long way, like the Buddha. So externally, with regard to relationships of other people, how they behave and how they act, or circumstances in society, governments, political leaders, big issues, yes, they can seem extremely overwhelming and we can't control them. However, the Buddha did talk about cultivating the path of awareness and mindfulness, because we can then be putting in the causes and the conditions that will lead to wholesome states of mind and action. So it's not like we have to give up entirely and say, well, I can't control, so therefore I'm not going to do anything. Because one of the chants you did is about mind is the forerunner of all states. So if we practice cultivating the mind, bringing wholesome states into the mind, such as the practice of loving kindness, and reminding ourselves that the present moment is what we really can make it, where we make a difference, then we don't have to feel despair and depression, because that can happen so easily when we think everything in the world is just chaotic, right? And so we start here. And that's why the practice of loving kindness is skillful, because we have to start with ourselves where we can, with our own mind states, because that's what's going to lead to the speech that is skillful and the actions that are skillful. And if we have wholesome states in our mind, then it's more likely we can share that goodness, that loving kindness with others. So equanimity is a very high state where it's not like you don't care. It's not the same as being, what's the word I'm looking for? Indifferent. It's not like, oh yeah, I don't care about anything. We might really care about what's happening in the world, for example. So it's not to stop caring, but when we're caught, or we're caught, we'll feel the pain. If we feel suffering, it's because we're either wanting something that isn't there. We want something to be another way, or we're pushing away. We're not wanting. That's one of the central teachings of the Buddha, which is the Four Noble Truths, the cause of suffering. And so we can look inward and discover if we're suffering, why is that the case? And we can work on that. And if we aren't suffering, then it's much more likely that we will act and speak in a way that's going to help instead of harm. Thank you for your question. Oh, okay, one more.
May I ask how long you've been practicing and what started you on the path of practice?
Sure. Okay, so I had started practicing in the 90s, getting interested in the teachings of the Buddha, mainly because of the challenges in my own life. The experience of dukkha, things not working out so well. Even though externally there were a lot of conditions that I liked, but still there was something underneath that was kind of nagging and not feeling just right. So I wanted to understand that. And I knew that I could blame the external situation, certain things, but actually there was something inside that said, well, I think it's the way I'm relating to it that's making the difference. So I started to read books, and I started to do some retreats in the late 90s. And through that, I noticed that really helped, because no matter what was happening around me, I could find a stability. And I'm not saying I became enlightened right away or anything like that, but there was a way of coming to a place of refuge. It's like you chanted about refuge in that the Buddha, the one who knows, that quality of being awake and aware. Refuge in Dhamma, the way things actually are. Okay, right now there's anxiety, or there's anger, or there's frustration, or that's the way things are. So it's not about eliminating them, it's about knowing that, okay, this is here. What is the quality of it? It's rising, it's passing. There's causes and conditions. I could investigate those. So I just saw, okay, this is a technique, and that is very helpful with the tumultuous, aspects of what were going on in my life. And so a friend told me about a monastery, and it was in the tradition of the Taoist lineage. I had been reading some of the teachings of some teachers like Ajahn Chah, Luangpo Sumedho, people, and it was in that tradition. So I thought, okay, I'll go over to England to this monastery. And it wasn't like I had thought, I always wanted to go to England. It's just that's where it was. And so I made that trip over. And at first I stayed as a lay guest, as people do, and just kind of felt what it was like to be in that environment. And it was very supportive, with meditation every morning, every evening, following along with the monks and the nuns in the practice. And at one point I asked to ordain as a anagarika, which means a 8 precept holder. And then it evolved from there, taking on 10 precepts and more training rules. And I lived in the monastery for 11 years. So after that, I came back to America because I grew up here, not in Wisconsin, but in California. I stayed in a monastery in the desert, and that's where I met Bhikkhuni Vimala. And I have traveled around, as she mentioned, to various places, and it's a continuous learning, growing experience. So that kind of brings me up to where we are now. And I don't know how we are with our time. Maybe, is it 8 o'clock, the closing?
It's about time to close.
Yeah. So I thank you for your attention and your questions, and I'd like to encourage you to continue your journey on this spiritual path. Very valuable.